All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to How Do We Win, the housing edition. We have some heavy hitters here tonight. We're going to talk about what winning looks like for our communities, what we've seen in our experience with housing and in community and doing this work, and some action steps that folks can take to get activated and motivated back home. I am Jess, they, she from BLM Indianapolis, also known as Indy 10, and I am facilitating tonight. Let's hear from Lena, if we can get an intro in your pronouns.
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Lena Catherine Gardner. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the executive director of the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. And were we answering the other question, or is that for later?
I think it's for later, but I'm glad that you brought it up
Okay.
so we can get right into it. Lena is excited, and I love the passion. One of the things that we want to talk with for intros, and take your time if you need to, is what the movement has looked like inside of the work that you do. How has 2020 influenced your work, and what have you seen because of it?
I will be brief and just say, so I'm located in Minneapolis. We had the uprising in the wake of George Floyd's murder, on top of the pandemic. And I think this moment has just been a real shock, especially in Minneapolis, around housing and how critical it is, and how many people are on the brink because of the pandemic and have lost jobs, have lost income. And we've got to rise up to try to help folks through all of this. And I will pass it off to Melody.
Melody, I think you're muted, love.
Hello? All right. I'm sorry, y'all. So I'm Melody McCurtis. Thank you for having me in this space. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm at Metcalf Park Community Bridges. The moment that we are in is just, really for me and for the work that we're moving, is that the world that we want to see is possible, right? And the conditions that our folks face, these were conditions that happened before the pandemic got here, right? These are conditions that we were already going through, and now it has spotlighted these conditions in a real way, that the world is seeing now, right? So for me, in this moment, we are able to dismantle, we're able to create, we're able to imagine, we're able to implement the things that we need to implement to keep our folks safe. And then I'm gonna pass it to Mona.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mona Jenkins. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Director of Development and Operations for the Greater Cincinnati Homeless Coalition. This moment, for me, has meant, a lot of us knew where we were prior to pandemic, and were knew that a lot of other folks wanted to try to deny where we were, right? The conditions that we were already in and facing. I think the pandemic last year, as well as the murders of Breonna Taylor, the murders of George Floyd just last year, along with the other ones of that year, highlighted, and I think it brought an awakening to those who weren't trying to pay attention.
Right. You really couldn't get away from it last year. I was one of the people who got reactivated after sitting it out for a few years, but seeing so many people in crisis and knowing that, you might have some of the resources that might be able to touch on bringing them out of crisis, just motivated a lot of people. Lena, we saw in Minneapolis, Minneapolis really catapulted a lot of other cities into being motivated to show just how frustrated we were with our elected officials and how frustrated we were with the pandemic, with how they've treated police-involved shootings, state-sanctioned violence, poverty, housing, all of these things. What did you see in Minneapolis leading up to the uprisings, and how did the uprisings kind of shift the housing needs in the city? Did it make it more urgent? Was it more pressing? Or did you find yourselves kind of lending help and support to other areas?
Yeah, thanks for that question. In the wake of the uprising, housing needs became much more pressing, and there were a variety of different tent cities, for lack of a better term, that popped up all over the city because of the disruption and the things that caused the uprising, and also the underlying structural issues of why people are experiencing housing insecurity. And so it really created a crisis. On the one hand, activists and organizers were really looking for mutual aid models to help support people who are living in the parks, in tents. We were really struggling with how do you keep people safe? How do you provide a harm reduction model for people who are struggling with substance abuse issues? How do you, really support people who are dealing with a lot of different needs that are unmet? And it really highlighted an issue that we see, which is passing the buck from one government agency to other. So the state was saying, this is a county problem, the county should deal with it. And the county was saying, we don't have the resources, the state should give us the money to help. And then the city, was also saying, we don't have the resources, it's not our problem. And it was like this, it was a continual circle of just a cluster of people eschewing responsibility and in a really dehumanizing way. And then you had a lot of neighbors and activists on the ground and people saying, these are people, these are humans. How do we help them with dignity and respect? And so I think that really came to a head in the wake of the riot and the uprising. And we're still, our city is still, reeling with it. We're still dealing with it. So I think it just really highlighted all of the areas where the state is failing, particularly Black and Indigenous people. There were a lot of Black and Indigenous people in the camps who could not access the things they need. And it really also brought up a lot of class tensions in our city between predominantly white homeowners and predominantly Black and Indigenous folks who have a lot of needs that are unmet. And so we're still reeling with that as a city. We're still grappling with that and how to find effective solutions and how to put pressure on the governments at every level to stop passing the buck and to take money away from the police and actually put it into housing people. So that's a big part of the work right now that we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And we want to welcome Justice to our panel. Justice, welcome. We're happy to have you. If you could give us just a brief intro with your pronouns, and then we're exploring what our cities and organizations and our communities look like prior to and during the uprising. So if you want to touch on that, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much. My apologies. My name is Justice Gaston, and I'm the founder of a grassroots organization called Real Justice Network. I use she, her pronouns. I'm really happy to be with you today. I was taking a call right before this call. I knew I needed to be on for tech check, but a girl called me from St. Louis jail and was, of course, wanting and needing some help. And what I'll say is, what I've seen is an increased number of Black women, particularly being incarcerated due to housing issues since this has happened. As a doula and a birth worker, I had seen this already with just the mamas that I deal with just even before the pandemic happened. But after the pandemic, things really escalated, right? And so you have people who are full blown now sleeping in streets. That's where we're at right now. For those of us who have been engaged in the work and do the work, we see a lot of waste. We see a lot of what we could have done with those resources, how we actually could have had permanent housing instead of making sure that some person at a nonprofit kept a job. And we're dealing with all of that right now in this space, right? Those same nonprofits still having access to the dollars. And those of us who are on the ground intimately doing the work with the people aren't so much seeing those dollars. Our communities are, fundraising for us, and we are doing mutual aid. But the monies that come from our tax dollars aren't reaching us where they need to reach us. And so I've just seen that exacerbated even more during the pandemic. But I've also seen people step up like never before through this time and be like, okay, we all we got. We're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to do what we always have done, which is look out for ourselves. And so you see that. Also seeing more solidarity with just communities of color, period. BIPOC communities who were saying, you know what, we got the same issues. The police beating all of us. We all out here. We all hungry. We all need a job. We all looking. And so I'm dead center in some of this work. There's other organizations in Kansas City that are doing some really, really great work that I support. Casey Tenants, they've been holding it down, shutting things down at the courthouse, making sure those evictions don't go through. But then there are other groups who are right on the streets trying to unionize houseless people, make sure that they actually have a voice in this process. So I'll curtail it right there.
Absolutely. And that's something that we're seeing, nationwide. Back home in Indianapolis, we're anxious about this moratorium ending, as I'm sure, the rest of y'all are. We have 50,000 families in our county, I believe, alone, who will be facing eviction if the moratorium ends. And people don't realize that housing issue is a social justice issue. It's a reproductive justice issue. All of these things are connected because ultimately the state will send its enforcements to move people out of a space that really we're entitled to. Housing is a right. And the state, unfortunately, has not come around to that, nor have many of the landlords. One of the things, too, that I've noticed as well is that people like to talk about affordable housing. So I'd love to touch on that. Melody, I think I read something, about the affordable housing crisis in Milwaukee. Is that something that you can, let us know what's going on there and what we're not seeing and what's not being spoken about?
Jess, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I love the question. I really hate the word affordable housing because who is it affordable to, right? It's not affordable to our folks, right? If the medium income, you got to have 50,000, but our community is only making 20,000 at the max, they can't even get in those houses. So we really have to dispel the framing and really, when people say affordable housing, know that it is a gentrifying word and a tool, right, to further gentrify and destroy BIPOC communities, right? Because when you have BIPOC communities, you have power. So one of the things that we're seeing in Milwaukee is that we don't have a rent cap, right? 50% of Milwaukee is owned by people that don't even live in Wisconsin at all, right? We have 76% renters in Metcalf Park, right? My community is 98% Black. So these were the conditions before a pandemic. And then when we throw a pandemic on top of that, when you throw all of the uprisings, when you see your Black brothers and sisters being killed in Milwaukee, right? After George Floyd, we had Joel Acevedo, in Kenosha, 30 minutes away, you had Jacob Blake. When you throw all of that on there, our folks are continuously staying in a survival mode, right? They have no ability to really be able to thrive. And housing really gives you, it should give you that security, those roots to be able to say, hey, I have affordable housing. I have lead-free housing, right? I know that I have a place for me and my children to grow, and I can focus on these other things in my life. And right now we are not seeing that. So that's why you have tenants unions coming up in Milwaukee, right? You have organizations like mine that are really creating community-owned housing, you know, community land trusts, right? To lock in that land, lock in those properties, and put our folks in that housing, because they should benefit from any development happening, right? They should be able to live in a place where they work, right? And they raise their children in, right? And then when we start looking at the city's budget, and we see that this budget does not value Black people. If 50% of it is going to the police, 2% is going to health, 1% of that is going to housing, this affordable housing, right, that our people can't even access. So that's the landscape of Milwaukee, and it's a lot of different movements that's popping up now, and that has been ongoing. And I think that's my time, so I'm stopped.
No, we don't have no timer. But I think you're absolutely right. That language is coded. You know, when we say certain things, who are we making it accessible to? So affordable housing is one of those buzzwords that those contractors like to see, because they know it's a guaranteed check from the city, state, or the feds, you know, sometimes all three if they're lucky. And it'll get them in the door to be able to establish that relationship, so that they'll have additional contracts, but there's not a care and consideration of community. Now, Mona, I know for Cincinnati, they like to pose y'all as kind of having the opposite problem, as, you know, saying that y'all are one of the most affordable places to live in the country. How have you seen that be played out in the work that you're doing in Cincy?
Even though we may be one of the most affordable places, we still have a housing crisis. So we are short 28,000 units of affordable housing within the city of Cincinnati, and throughout Hamilton County, it's 40,000 units. So 75% of the folks who are experiencing homelessness are Black. The average age is a 9-year-old child. And so when you are looking at So what was the one way to face COVID? What was the first thing they said? Stay at home. If you're experiencing homelessness, you can't stay at home. Where are you supposed to go? A lot of the jails were releasing folks. Where were they supposed to go? Even if they were living with a relative, a lot of relatives were saying, you don't come in here. They're at high risk. So we saw a significant increase in unhoused folks. And where are they to go? Because you want to make sure that they're safe as well, right? So, and I don't see our affordable housing crisis getting any better. You know, we work for the homeless. I work for the Homeless Coalition, and it would be far worse, but it should be far better, right? If there was intentional, if our governments were working cooperatively to directly address the issue. We're talking about years of intentional legislation that put us here. We don't have time for the years, because it's life or death. Life or death on top of life or death, right? Housing is a basic necessity: food, clothing, water, shelter. You don't have those, you don't live, right? So this has, our issue has gotten worse, but then when we see that the realities of when we're asking for, within this crisis, that yes, we do defund the police. Some of this funding needs to go towards housing. Again, life or death. So when you're only spending, like in Milwaukee, notice how these trends are going throughout all of our cities, right? About 1% is going towards human services. It's about the same there in Milwaukee. You said about 50% of your budget is going towards police. Ours is 65 that goes towards police and fire safety. So why are all of our budgets so out of whack? Unless it's intentionally done, it's just genocide on a different level.
I would absolutely agree. I think that was something that I heard being lifted up a lot over the summer as people were building their defund campaigns. Was that overall, that we see in areas that have newer homes, that there is additional financial stability, there's additional community support through like community centers, good education, having access to resources that folks just don't in our communities. I'll open this up to everyone. What responsibility? So it's a two-part question. What responsibility do you see yourself having as someone who is kind of rooted within, housing justice, as far as lending yourself to additional social justice initiatives, and then what type of support? What does support look like for you all? So how do you support, and then what does support look like for you? I know a lot of us. I was managing a full-time job during the uprising, and that wasn't something that I would suggest anybody does. And I was running a homeless shelter, ran out of the city at the time. I remember being conflicted because there were uniformed police on site every day, and these were people that who had to check in with me, I had to regularly converse with, who were attempting to kind of stretch themselves and overreach the power that they had outside the building, but bringing that inside this specially made shelter. So it creeps into, every facet of everything that we do. But for you all, what does support look like? And then how did you find yourselves supporting through the crisis, and even now as we're looking towards the COVID relief bill being passed and additional moratoriums being extended?
I can offer up some of the things that Blue is doing. So we are doing a couple of things. We got about $40,000 in grant money to re-grant to individuals to help with COVID-related costs in their families for Black folks. And so we are figuring out, how do we distribute those funds? How do we make sure people who need it have the access to apply for the money? And so that can be used for burial costs, hospital costs, medical costs, or transportation to get a COVID test or a COVID vaccine now. So that's something we're working on. The other thing I will say that really, we started a housing initiative in 2019, excuse me, and the events of last year really underscored the importance of us expediting the initiative. And what the initiative is we bought 8 vacant lots of land, and we are going to construct townhomes that are like individual homes, 4-bedroom or 3-bedroom, and there'll be a shared wall, but they will be individual homes. Each site is going to be its own cooperative, and the folks are going to be able to buy into the cooperative, so they are building wealth. And the idea is that it will be for Black and Indigenous moms. That's sort of the groups that we're hoping will be able to access it. And then also the land will be put in a land trust. And the reason we're doing that is because we did a bunch of research with other groups who have been in housing way longer than we are. We're very new to this. And one of the things that when you talk about permanently affordable and actually affordable housing, if you don't take away the speculative housing market incentive of developers coming in and telling families, we'll give you this obscene amount of money for your house, that's a good windfall for that family, and that certainly changes the material conditions of their lives. However, it takes away that permanently affordable. It's not permanent, right? It takes that away. So how you make it permanent is putting it into a land trust. So we are partnering with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust to do that. We're also partnering with another group here called Urban Homeworks, and we just officially announced it, and we basically expedited our projects. So those are the things we're doing. We're hoping in the end that we'll have anywhere from 30 to 36 families that this will help. And the disparities are so stark in Minnesota that this will have a statistically significant impact on home ownership for Black and Indigenous people in our state. because the disparities are so great. Even just getting 36 families in makes a difference. So that's what we're doing. As far as, how other people can support, obviously capital. This is what all these projects take, is capital. And it is so hard, especially when you're doing an unconventional approach. People are like, are you taking, government subsidies, local subsidies? And we're saying, no, we're not, because some of the feedback we got from our folks was that these don't work for us. And if you're working too much, then suddenly you're not qualified. But how are you supposed to feed your kids when you need to work more? So it's like these things we don't want to get caught up in. It's just about how do we raise the capital. And then, not everybody wants to live in a cooperative, and that is okay. So it's like, how do we find the folks that do want to live in a cooperative style, and really build community, really go deep on what it means to try to build a community around ideas of Black liberation, around the idea that all Black lives matter. And how do we do that together, and really help change some material conditions for folks.
I love that. Justice, what has support looked like for you all going out and coming in the midst of a pandemic and global uprisings?
Yeah, so first off, I just want to shout out Lena and Blue. They've been like such a great supporter of the work that we've done and are doing at Real Justice Network. And so inspired to hear what they have going on. Before the pandemic, we were engaged in help really the housing scam in KC. And unfortunately, we do have a cluster of folks in our city who do operate housing scams on the regular. So what we do is consistently watch them, try to bust those folks up. They will literally take all that somebody has, and somebody thinks they have a house that they're going to be in, and then they find out they've been scammed. And so this has been a thing in Kansas City. My group, we helped over 100 plus people through this scam that happened. We will continue to help people through it. I will continue to sit there and file whatever papers we need to with our Attorney General and our State General office, get legal support for people who are those kinds of things, to try to hook them up with direct services, because while they're going through that, they still got to have a place to live and lay their heads. And you all know that a well-resourced community is a safe community. That's the best thing we can do for public safety, is make sure that every single person has a safe place to lay their head. It is actually a human right, in my opinion. One of the things before the pandemic that we were engaging in is buy the block. We were buying properties from the land bank and utilizing our siblings who experienced incarceration and cannot find these jobs, people willing to hire them to actually do the work to get these houses in order. We were letting people, the goal is that community members can get into one of these houses and they have to pay their utilities. But as far as rent goes, we're asking for people to actually volunteer time. We want community service. We want people to understand that time is valuable as well. And I would rather those people to spend time working on helping somebody else get into a house too, than for us to be worrying about if they're going to pay a $700, $600, whatever dollar mortgage or amount. And so reimagining how we take care of ourselves. We have 2 properties now. We intend to grow food. I came from a family of farmers. My grandmother's a medicine woman. She grew herbs. She grew food. She made everything, kind of getting back to a lot of those things. And then how people can actually support us. We do have an initiative right now with our community house, Real Justice Network Community House. We're just the organizers. We can come, have a safe place so we can plan and do the things that we need to do to go out and help our communities. And so those are the things that we have going on right now, as well as supporting the existing work that folks are doing in our city. We're a big supporter of that work. I don't have to be the voice. There are other people who can talk and get out there. We want to support that. I want to support that.
I love that. And I love the collaboration. I think that folks think that, you know, things happen inside of a vacuum as far as movement space is concerned. But a lot of the things are connected, you know. So even though my specialty might be direct action, I still might have a comrade or someone who might need to be connected to housing or to, you know, reproductive justice resources or to mental health resources. And you're absolutely right, Justice. It's a human right. And if you don't have, you know, your basic rights taken care of, then you're going to do what you feel like you need to in order to meet those needs. Mona, what's been going on with Cincy? What has I know you've been busy because we've been busy together. But where has housing taken you during the uprising and the pandemic? And then what type of support have you all seen because of it?
So with the pandemic, one thing within Cincinnati is we have several organizations that work together. Most of us work well together. And so when we lost Sam DeBose during that time was one of the times when we formed one of those coalitions. And so where it was Black Lives Matter Cincinnati, later known as Mass Action for Black Liberation. The Homeless Coalition was part of that, NAACP, about 23 different organizations. So the Homeless Coalition had already been out in the streets. So the fact that I was dually, one, fighting for Black liberation, but also for housing, but housing is fighting for Black liberation. And that was something that in coming to the Homeless Coalition, I made sure that folks knew, especially, like I said, statistically, housing is affecting Black folks, Black and Indigenous, and poor folks. So we're getting hit on all ends. And so it's always been a priority for us to be in the streets, but also take care of folks so that they can be there, right? It doesn't help if we're showing up and don't have housing. It doesn't help if we're showing up and aren't fed and don't have the support that we need. Then we can't accurately support the next person, right? So really making sure that I myself am taken care of, that the folks that I work with are taken care of, are priorities. And so how can folks show up? Right now in Cincinnati, 2018, we established an affordable housing trust fund, but they never established how they were funding it. So did you really plan on using this trust fund if you never had any sources of funding going into it? So we, the people, because the city wasn't coming up with any sources of funding, we said, all right, well, let's get this on the ballot. Let's see, do you folks really want this funded? And we investigated various ways of getting it funded, right? So we listed to the city, you can increase the earnings tax, you can take it from the general funding, which i.e. would mean that our police budget would go down. But we gave numerous ways. So in trying to meet folks halfway, hey, yeah, you know, of course we would love to take it from directly the general fund, but in trying to at least get some grounding and housing, period, sometimes you got to make a little bit of meet folks halfway. So right now, we were able to get 9,000 signatures to put it on the ballot. The city did not think that we were going to be able to do it. So all of a sudden when it happened, you know, that light bulb went off like, oh my God, that panic button. And so they got to move in to try to tell folks don't vote for it. Don't, you know, this is only going to cause, you know, fear mongering. This is only going to cause issues in the streets. You're going to lose your job. You're not going to, all of this. So one way folks can support us is to understand what this means by having funding sources and to support the ballot initiative.
Love that. Melody, in Milwaukee, you touched a little bit about how the language about affordable housing is coded, and how, it just kind of dog whistles to certain people that it's open season for contracts. How have you found the city responding to the housing crisis versus some of the work that you all are doing? Is it overlapping? There's obviously a deficit with the city that we reside in, because if there wasn't, we wouldn't have work, right? We wanted to get to that point, but right now I think we are all, we're going to be secure for a little while in the work that we're individually and collectively doing. So what have you seen from the city side as far as supporting the work that you do, or listening to you all as you're relaying what you're seeing as you're doing this work?
Yeah, so for us in Milwaukee, we've been talking about defund the police for a while. I remember when our campaign was divest invest, right? And talking, reviewing our DOJ reports of the police budget and different things like that in 2016. Our city is going to keep making mistakes, right? No matter, who's the elected officials, because 9 times out of 10, even if those folks look like me, they're not from our communities, right? So they're making all of these decisions that harm, right? So as we educate the community, we have to educate these folks as well. So one of the cool things that happen, I'm not going to say cool things, one of the good things that happen is, this year through the Liberate MKE campaign, which is a coalition of a whole bunch of Black organizations and folks in Milwaukee, we changed the language this year, right? We said we want a $75 million divestment into community-owned housing, right? Health and access to health, right? And the alder in my district actually passed a resolution to put 1.5 million into community-owned housing, right? So you have to be building with your community. You have to be educating with your community, because how many times do you go in community and I grew up in low income, right? I grew up in poverty. We grew up in affordable housing, right? We have to do that education with our folks, but we have to do that with these folks in power, right? Because they are in control of our everyday existence when they make these decisions. So you have to do all of these things at the same time. And when you ask to defund, my approach is, I want y'all to actually cut a check. I don't want y'all to move no money around to another department. I want it to come out of the city, period, right? And you can't demand that if you don't have anything that's controlled by the people, right? For them to cut that check too. So really dismantling, educating, and creating a space to imagine, right? We didn't just start doing this housing work. We've been the community's going to look at cooperative models, right? Worker co-ops, doing that education and building with each other. We've been laying that ground and sneaking and doing it, right? Because what we are all up to is taking power, right? And declaring that we want to thrive. And if you're loud with it, people try to shut you down. So we've been able to sneak and do some stuff, right? So now we're at that point where we're building, we're dismantling, and we're creating a space to imagine, like, we can, thrive, right? We can liberate ourselves, right? Anything is possible when we do it together. We can get these houses, put them in the land trust to double protect it, right? We can create a worker co-op to make sure the landscape and the maintenance, the snow removal, the grass cutting, all of these lots is secured and locked in for generations to come. And we can build intergenerational wealth and health for us, by us. So that's what we're up to. And folks can support by cutting the check, right? I wouldn't say that to my BIPOC folks. What I would say for my civs is, help us build this for us. What I would say to white folks is, you want to help, you want to support, direct reparations, right? What I would say to these cities and states and these institutions, cut the check, right? The people know what they need, right? And if we listen to the people, we wouldn't be having these conversations in 2021 about housing. We wouldn't be having these conversations, in the wake of all of our kinfolks being killed in 2021 and 2020 at the hands of the police, right? It just doesn't make sense to keep doing the same thing to get the same results.
Ooh, powerful. Okay. We'll take just a little bit of an intermission, not really. Lena is going to do some mommying and some other very important revolutionary things. So she's gonna give us some final thoughts, and we're just gonna try to keep it going in your absence, Lena. I'll try.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you all for inviting me into this conversation. I'm inspired by everyone's work, and just shout out back to Justice. Your work is inspiring and amazing. I also just want to note the win in Minneapolis of getting $8 million divested from the police. However, it's just like a tiny fraction. So we have so much more work to do. But thank you for this. I'm inspired. I hope to connect with all of you separately because, yeah, we have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Now, one of the things Indiana that we're dealing with that I'm sure y'all are dealing with elsewhere as well. So Indiana is a red state. You know, a lot of us are living in red states attempting to do this nonpartisan, necessary work, but it's a red state. So right now, our Indiana General Assembly is basically at war, it feels like, with the community and with the governor. They actually overturned some protections that the governor, our Republican governor, put in place for tenants against their landlords. So right now, you know, Indiana is just pro landlord. They struck down a bill that we were working on with a local legislator where we were trying to set folks up with an attorney in eviction court, which can make a world of difference. Anytime you go before a judge, it cannot hurt to have an attorney. And the attorney would have just been there in kind of a public defender role where they take a brief look at the docket, they advise you of your options, maybe they can help you mediate, but if nothing else, you have legal representation that was built into the state and city's budget if you are facing eviction. And Indianapolis has some of the highest eviction rates in the country, and they struck that down. So that hurt. So what are some ways that you've seen legislation play out in your respective cities? And then how have you had to be kind of creative and go around that? You know, we're not strangers to alchemy. I like to say Black women in films are the original alchemists because we can make something out of nothing. You know, you put bone in some water and you boil it, you got broth. So we're not strangers to alchemists at all. But what are some ways that you've had to pull from some non-traditional resources that you have to get folks needs met? And then how have you seen legislation play out in your cities that have impacted some of the work that you're doing?
I can take a shot at that. So let me start with the legislation part first. I would say in our city, in Kansas City particularly, there are organizing groups that have been fighting for a tenants union. And it was what usually happens with anything like that is that, you know, you get people excited and they pass the thing, but they don't look back to see, you know, is it funded? Is it going to be funded? Does this have any kind of teeth? Does it have any kind of real power? And that's the thing that we've noticed here. People will fight for a thing, but it doesn't have, it's underfunded and it doesn't have real power. And Missouri, well, I'm in Missouri, so the state is red. And, you know, they're trying to take everything away from us, including make it legal to kill us when we're protesting by making it okay for folks to hit us with their vehicles. And I know that some of these are being introduced in state legislatures around the country. But it's historical that inequity has always been codified in the law. And so that's the reason for the wealth gap, right? We talk about housing, redlining, keeping Black folks away from building that kind of wealth to pass on. And so what we see in Missouri and Kansas City is more of the same in a sense. Now, I will say that our city council did pass a measure that made it so that racism is a public health issue. But for me, saying it is not enough. So now is what are we going to do about it? And that's where our city tends to fall short. We tend to fall short on the what are we going to really do about the people? But we're always very in a hurry to give big bonuses and TIF money and all kinds of stuff to big businesses that come in our communities and don't even contribute back. They tell a lot out, more and more of the same. So what have we been doing? Organizing, raising hell, not caring about their table anymore, creating our own table. Our food is better anyway, and making sure that we have all of the things there. We always have known that we have the answers. In Kansas City, probably around the country, y'all see, what we see particularly, a lot of white folks, white women in particularly, will come in and create organizations for work that we're already doing. Like, y'all, we're here doing this. But because they are given more resources, and then they come and kind of creates this thing, right? Where the saviorism, we see a lot of that here that we're fighting. And I know y'all are seeing it too, because I get to talk to some of y'all. The fight is real, but through it all, we maintain our integrity. We educate our communities on what it is they need to know. We organize them. We get them to those budget hearings where they're testifying on those budget hearings. We're meeting, growing power amongst ourselves, asking the right questions, and learning how we can access and tap into that money that is supposed to be spent for our safety. And doing other stuff, making sure that we are absolutely involved in the electoral process, making sure and we're prepping our people to run to take over these offices for these folks who are supposed to represent us, but they don't. Building our power in that way and not stopping is what we're doing.
I'd have to say one of the biggest.
Our food tastes better on our own table. Y'all know it do. We got the collard greens and we got the mac and cheese. And we got some vegan food too. Come on, my vegans. Come on through. Come on through.
Hashtag.
Because you don't know what you get when you go to somebody else's house and eat at their table. Y'all know that. Who made the potato salad?
That's right. That's right.
So that's what I'm saying. We got our own table. Let's build at our table. For years, we begged these folks, let us have a seat. Let us be a part. No more. Time out for that. If we didn't learn anything from that last presidential election, we knew that white women wasn't going to be the ones to help us through. But they voted more for Trump this time than they did the time before. So my goodness. And what I say to white people in general, you really want to be an ally, you really want to be in this movement, you need to learn how to listen and take direction from Black people, in particularly Black women, in particularly Black trans women. That's who you need to listen to and take direction for. And don't make another organization that Black women gonna have to go and clean up, because that's all y'all do. That's what y'all do when y'all do that. We got it. Join in to what is already existing. Don't think you're going to come in and take the microphone and be, no, you got to sweep the floor. You got to spend some time. And you got to do your work. Ooh, y'all. I know they ask you to do the work for them. I know they do. Just exhausting us. Send them a bill.
I mean, and really, that's what it is, trying to run us into the ground. I mean, but you look at a lot of the things that we created, or that were made known because we did it first, and how whiteness just comes in and commodifies it and remarkets it. You know, it's been done with restorative and transformative justice. It's been done with community work. It's been done with everything from leftovers. We used to make leftovers stretch for the whole week. Now they call it meal planning. I'm like, child, it ain't enough spaghetti to go containers for me to eat it for 7 days. Anyway, Mona, you look like you had something to say before I go off on a tangent. What you got for people?
Oh, I can't even remember at this point. I think we were talking about legislation. How are we shifting as far as mutual aid? So I think one of the things that happened during the pandemic was, especially a lot of nonprofit agencies were waiting on CARES Act funding, right? Waited. Who's going to get it? Where's it going? Then you got to wait for the city to approve how they're making payments. Then you got to work for the county because the county's got this. And a lot of us were just like, you know what? We can't wait on y'all. We're going to figure this out one way or the other. How do you provide the funding to agencies that don't have the capacity to distribute it to Black folks, to those who need it, right? How are you getting money to deal with evictions when you don't have the capacity to complete the application, let alone even understand the application to explain to somebody who needs to fill it out? So you're causing more harm to them because not only are they enduring homelessness, but now they got to go through the mental trauma of, I got to answer all these questions. I got to prove myself that I deserve this. And it's like, let's eliminate all that. We don't need to traumatize each other. All of us are traumatized and we've experienced that. So why would we continue to force somebody else to endure that as well, right? So in recognizing, our priority was we got to get it to the people whatever way possible. What are we going to do? We're not going to wait. So it might be calling Uncle Fred, like, look, I need you to do this. I got a mom that's here who's going through this. We need to do this, right? So you might have to make some phone calls and plead and make those connections. But it's also not only you providing that support, but you're building along the way, right? Not even intentionally, right? Because your priority is to meet those needs. And so all of a sudden, when you're building that sense of community, you're building that sense of connection, but also dependency, which we all need someone, right? Why do we need to depend on the government when we should be shifting that to ourselves, right? Because the government it keeps giving us crumbs and we can't get nowhere. I need the whole pie. I like dessert. I need it all. Our people deserve it all. I don't want no halves of nothing, right? And that's what they keep doing. So even some of this legislation that they keep doing, like I said earlier, yeah, you gave us the trust fund, but why is it that y'all never found funding for it? And then when we come to you, you want to push back even more. Or even criminalizing homelessness. In 2018, that must have been the year for us. Good Lord, I keep saying it. But they basically criminalize homelessness. So you can't sleep out in a tent in Cincinnati. You get a ticket or arrested. So then where are those folks supposed to go? They can't be out in the open. Some of us know where they are. Or we either house them, we put them somewhere. But you can't have them now being exposed to elements, but also exposed to the police. So we've had to find different ways outside of the box, and we will continue to. We are inventors, right? And we have been inventing ways of getting ourselves out of these predicaments. So that's what we're going to have to continue to do.
Yeah.
Can I jump
important.
in?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, please do, Melody.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about when I used to go over my grandma's house and she would just give us all of this food. My mom would be like, "You overfeed them, right?" You know how your grandmas, your mama, they never let you starve, right? So if we depend on our states, right, to ensure that we have the things that we need, if we realistically was to wait to do that in 2020, we would starve, right? And mutual aid is not a new thing for Black folks, right? It's been there. It's always been there, right? I'm thinking about when we launched our mass mutual aid, right? We didn't have no funding for that. We didn't know how it was gonna happen. We just knew that it needed to get done, right? And we was gonna do whatever we needed to do for our community, right? And holding folks accountable that got that money, at the same time. And that's the things that we're doing in Milwaukee. And now we didn't turn our mutual aid into a Metcalf Park freedom shop, right? Where people can come and get the things they need and be seen and treated whole in their full dignity, you know. So just thinking about all of this pressure, all of this work that we aim towards these institutions that will not reform, that will not change. If we put that same type of energy and grace in room, because we real graceful with them folks. We really is. We say we not, but we is, right? Every time we say, this is our money, your job is to do what I asked you to do, right? And you doing the opposite, and then it don't change. We be at some level we being graceful, right? So just giving ourselves grace, giving ourselves room, right? And really getting back to us. For 2020, for me, that's one of the main things that I saw shift, is that Black people got back to them, you know, in a real way. It really activated, you know, folks that people don't even think about. Poor Black folks, the drug dealers. You know, I'm from that community. You know, Trump gave us civics 101, right? He, you know, where people that wasn't engaged was engaged in a new way, because they was like, hold up, this how this really work? Yeah, this how this really work. It's messed up. We got to tear it all down, but we can also build something beautiful, something that's centered in Black joy, Black love, right, and dignity. And when we do that, anything is possible. I remember we didn't have no food, but my mama made it happen. I remember the lights got cut off and our neighbors hooked something up and we had lights. So just really getting back to us in a real way. And I think that we are on our way, and we gonna get everything that we declare moving forward.
You absolutely said it. So I think that you all just gave a lot of things for folks to think about and hopefully to get activated on. I know that one of the ways that was empowering for me was just reading my lease, but also the privilege that that takes, and that when we look at, you know, who has access to time and energy to look through a several page document, to comprehend it, to be able to ask questions without fear of retribution, which means that you're not back, you don't owe rent, you know, you don't have any outstanding complaints, there hasn't been any police activity at your home. So it's a privilege to be able to face housing in the way that we do and how we show up for other people. And I'm hoping that folks can get activated as well from some of the info that they heard today. For you, what do the next 6 months in the movement look like for you as an individual and with the organizations that you work with? What do the next 6 months look like? Let's start with Mona.
What does the next 6 months look like? You know, I think we've been in, we had a cold winter, a cold pandemic winter. So you know, it's normal for spring to come and folks want to be out. And considering the fact that we had the pandemic on top of that, I know folks are really going to be out on the street. We've taken the time to kind of think about this over the last couple of months, was what would happen right about now as folks are starting to come up, as anniversaries are starting to come up, as reminders are starting to come up, as trials are starting to come up, because this re-traumatizes us, and we haven't gotten justice yet. So, you know, we're going to be out in the streets. I think we also took this time to see how this pandemic really affected us. Talk about not having a social safety net. I mean, the threads of that were cut, and a lot of people fell through. And I think that encouraged folks to really examine, you know, how the state violence, basically from all levels, whether it be housing, whether it be food access, whether it be police brutality. And so I think a lot of people will, come out and start trying to get involved, plugging in, fighting for justice, but also supporting their neighbors, right? When Melody was speaking, I started thinking about, what mutual aid looked like back in the day. And it was, hey, you go to a neighbor, you're like, can I borrow a cup of sugar? Can't really do that too much, right? So then, and that's partially because we had our neighborhoods, which we could then depend on one another. We couldn't get check to check. Go down to Crawford's house and, take her a plate because, she's not feeling well or things of that sort. And with this pandemic and the shift of housing and folks' situations, that part has deteriorated as well, right? Already we were isolated. Now you're breaking up the few relationships that we may have had with our neighbors. And so that this next, this time will be for healing. It'll be for trying to build some relationships. I know folks are going to be looking for that. So how can we support that? So it's not only the food and the housing, but it's also how do you feed somebody's soul during this time? So I think that's what is we're going to be facing in the next 6 months.
Sorry, Melody. Final thoughts. 6 months from now, what does it look like for you and with the work that you do?
Oh, this is a tough one. One of the things is connecting, right? Connecting to other folks that's in this work, not only within our cities and our states, but across, those borders, right? To really create that web of not only solidarity but support, right? Where we are supporting each other in a massive way. Definitely healing, right? Definitely healing. 2020 was a brutal year for Black folks. When you think about everything that has happened. And I think that, and what I'm hopeful for Black folks is that we allow ourselves time to rest, right? And to process everything that has happened for the sake of our healing journey and what we need to be in practice right now to build out the world that we want to live in. I think a lot of that is going to be happening over the next 6 months. And I also think that people that normally would not have been in community with each other or talking to each other are going to connect in a deeper way, a real way. And folks are going to be activated differently, right? They're going to be activated, centered in they're seen, they're heard, and I'm supported, right? Because at the end of the day, we in this together. And whatever happens to y'all, that affects me. So that's what I'm hopeful for, and I think that can happen not only within my organization and in my city, but across and within all of our movements.
Well, it's a lot of work ahead, right? So I echo everybody first off on the healing and restoration is vitally important. I mean, we can't pour from an empty cup. So we must take the time to take care of ourselves and know that it is a mandate and a requirement of the movement. It's okay. It's radical to take care of yourself and love yourself. We're so used to giving all that we have to everybody else. So I'm prioritizing that for myself, really leaning in spiritually, something that I've kind of run from, but it's always been there with me. So I'm embracing it. Why not? And I'm going to be doing a lot of work in my city, in Kansas City, particularly with that certain movement alignment, trying to help get people settled to the right places. Those of us who really deal with political education and Black feminist radical theories, that kind of thing. There's a lot of misalignment in my community, and we've got some work to do there, but it's coming along. And so I'll be engaging in that. And of course, electoral politics, register people to vote, knocking on these doors, bugging everybody, and making food for the table. And I invite y'all, right? Somebody bring the peas, bring the greens. Somebody make that potato salad, because we're going to feast at our own table. That's what we're doing. I think Jess got frozen.
You know, the devil is busy, but my ancestors are busier. Ha! Imagine thinking I would come back like that cold sore you've been ignoring. You can't get rid of me. Although I do not want to be. No, you know what? In the spirit of no shame, I won't even say what I was going to say. I am grateful for what y'all have given. I think it's important that people see that nonprofits aren't the only ones who hold the power in our communities, that the elected officials aren't the only ones that hold the power. The power really is with us. And when I think of how we win, I immediately think of together. You know, that was overarching theme of tonight for me, was hearing how togetherness helps to empower people and how to keep folks safe and housed. So I hope that in whatever it is that you all do, that we continue to stay connected with each other and with community, and that as we go forward in winning, that we do it together. It is our duty to fight for our freedom, and it is our duty to fucking win, y'all. Let's get it to freedom.
To freedom.
To freedom. Nothing to lose.
Right?
Nothing. All right. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us tonight.